Good morning, everybody. We're back on the record in state. This is actually Benefield 2020 CF 3014. Thank you for your patience as we've gotten started this morning. First thing, we had early this morning, a juror call in that there was some car trouble. The juror was running late. My understanding is all the jurors are here and they've been brought up. And then obviously I've had computer problems this morning. So we'll just get going. Anything you need to bring up before we resume with the defendant's case in chief?
Judge, the clerk notified me on Friday that we had not actually entered states 103 and 104. So I would like to go ahead and enter those. I don't know if the defense has an objection. We can do it in our case in rebuttal if we need to, but we did talk about them during testimony. I just didn't say the magic words.
I just don't know what 103 and 104 is.
I don't either.
Modeling picture and the mugshot.
Oh, actually, yes, we do have something to say about that.
All right, so you're just going to save that until your rebuttal?
Yes, and then just to put on the court's.
There's a discovery issue with respect to those two photographs. We were never provided them.
Well, the mugshot.
All right.
Certainly.
So I'm making a note that we have to have a Richardson hearing on that issue then.
And also just to, for scheduling purposes, at some point, hopefully before right at lunch, I would like to have a discussion about whether the court would allow the state to introduce evidence from Dr. Broder that we had previously talked about before. I just wanted to get ruling from the court so I know whether to get him here or not.
I don't know what evidence it is, so I'll just wait for you to bring it up. Any issues before we resume?
No, sir.
All right. Kate, you ready?
Yes.
All right. You said ready.
Yes, sir.
All right, just want to make sure. Are you feeling all right?
Yeah, picked up a little cold, but I'm good.
Same here. So I understand. Everybody, good morning. I don't know who had car trouble, but I hope everything worked out and you've had time to calm down from that. So we're going to get started as when we left on Friday. So Fitz was presenting his case. I do need to ask you though before we get started because we just search or.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Bruce Ferris.
Thank you. Morning, Judge.
Morning, sir. My name is Judge Whyte. I'm going to be presiding over this case. Just have a seat, make yourself comfortable in that chair. Get yourself about 12 to 15 inches from that microphone. It's pointed straight up, but it does adjust down, left, right, up, down, whatever you need. And you just speak directly, a loud, clear voice into the microphone. It should pick up everything.
I will. Good morning.
Will you tell us your full name, spell your last name, please?
Bruce Eric Ferris, last name Ferris.
Mr. Ferris, what type of work do you do?
A licensed mental health counselor.
And how long have you held that position?
I've been doing that for 14 years. I've counseled individuals I just recently counted 1,000 clients, not including group work I've done. I also am a consultant in domestic violence and testify as an expert court witness in domestic violence.
Talk about your education for a minute. Please enlighten us.
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering. I graduated from the Police Academy in Gainesville, Florida, and I have a master's degree in mental health counseling.
And do you have any specialized education or training in a specific field?
Yes, been to a lot of training seminars and certifications and various references in my curriculum vitae. I'll call it a CV, my resume. There's about 100 items listed of trainings that I've been to over the years.
For what specific field?
In domestic violence and mental health and trauma to children and trauma in general. And I could go on, but that's the general focus of all my work.
Let's talk about your work experience for a moment.
Oh,
Tell us about it, please.
so as a counselor now, my day is spent seeing individual clients. I specialize, like I mentioned, in domestic violence victimization, both men and women. I also see generalized mental health issues and typical things that a counselor would do, but I have a focus on domestic violence and family problems. I also counsel adolescent boys, most of which are going through the foster care system or adoption or divorce of their parents, etc.
All right, and what position did you hold prior to that?
I was a police officer in Gainesville, Florida for 20 years. I graduated the police academy in 1993, got sworn in 94, and I retired in 2013. The last 10 years of that career, I was a detective, uniquely running. I was the lead detective of what's called the Domestic Violence Unit of the Investigations Bureau at the Gainesville Police Department. Over the course of that time, when I retired, I looked back and did a little search, and I had arrested or filed charges or got warrants on 500 different abusers over those years.
Mr. Ferris, give us an idea of your professional credentials, likely.
Sure. I'm licensed with the state of Florida, like I mentioned, as an LMHC or licensed mental health counselor. I have to keep up with education, et cetera, keep my license active. I'm certified as a batter's intervention program facilitator. In case anyone doesn't know it, batter's intervention, which I'll refer to as BI, is a 6-month class given to abusers who are found guilty or on probation or could be part of their injunction order. And it's a curriculum based upon the Duluth Power and Control Wheel. It's a type of therapy that involves some counseling and some ownership and learning. And also was a certified police officer, I mentioned. I also have certification as a domestic violence danger assessment and level of danger scoring system developed by Jackie Campbell out of Johns Hopkins University. And I also have a certification as adoption competency training, mental health for mental health professionals out of Rutgers University. I'll stop there.
And briefly, have you been the recipient of various awards and recognition?
Yeah, I have.
Give us a brief idea.
The Alachua County Board of Commissioners had nominated me to Governor DeSantis to be part of the Children's Trust Fund of Alachua County. I received the 31st Annual Martha Varnes Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Prevention of Domestic Violence Against Women. I had recognition for valuable contributions in what's called crisis intervention team. I train officers how to de-escalate confrontations with citizens. I did receive the 2010 Distinguished Victim Service Award for recognition of outstanding contributions to crime victims for National Crime Victims Week by State Attorney General Pam Bondi awarded that to me, and Governor Scott at the time was there for the presentation. I'll stop there. There's a few more.
Have you been recognized as an expert on domestic violence in various courts of the state of Florida before?
I have.
Approximately how many?
So I've been involved in 60-some cases as either consultant or expert witness. 50 of those I've been recognized by the judiciary as an expert in domestic violence, mental health, batter's intervention, effects of DV on children.
All right, and when you say you've appeared before approximately 60 times as an expert witness, was it for any particular side in a dispute? That is to say, for example, in a criminal case, was it always for the prosecution, always for the defense?
But both. I worked for the state attorney's office and worked for defense, and a majority of my cases have been in civil court, though I have worked in criminal court also.
Would you, Mr. Ferris, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what another definition of domestic violence is?
Well, so there's the criminal statutes of domestic violence, which are typically, we all know it's battery, assault, ag assault, false imprisonment, sexual abuse, et cetera, person crimes involving a family or household member against each other. And that has another definition. That's spouses or family members living together, or it could be a couple that had a child together and have never lived together. It doesn't include, let's say, cousins who've never lived together and aren't intimate in any way. But through my experience, I've realized that there's a greater, that's umbrella, and that has to do with power and control. The abuser needs to control their victim. Now, they'll use the criminal things, hitting, all those things, but in a greater sense, there's also this, I referenced it earlier, the Duluth Power and Control Wheel that DCF's accepted for the BIP class. I'd like to explain the Power and Control Wheel, if that's okay.
In fact, with the court's permission, we can perhaps have the screen come down and the lights dim. First, you have a laser pointer in front of you. The little star in red will provide you with...
Judge, may I stand here and pay attention to the mic as I talk?
Any objection?
So as I mentioned, there's the criminal definition.
Objection, was there a question?
Go ahead with the question.
Yes. What is it that's on the screen?
Right. So what
Mr.
I'm,
Ferris? Mr. Ferris,
yes, sir.
would you please tell us what is on the screen?
I will. So this is what's referred to as the Duluth Power and Control Wheel. And so there's physical violence and sexual violence. Those are the criminal things I talked about. And then there's these power and control aspects. And the nature of the power and control is repetitive. It's a way to get control. So up at, we'll call it 1 o'clock, using intimidation, making her afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying her property, abusing pets, and displaying weapons would be an aspect of intimidating your partner, again, to gain control. Using emotional abuse, putting her down, making her feel bad about herself, calling her names, making her think she's crazy, playing mind games, humiliating her, making her feel guilty. Ventilation, controlling what she does, who she sees and talks to, what she reads, where she goes, limiting her outside involvement, using jealousy to justify actions. Then a big one that I see often is minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse, not taking her concern seriously, saying abuse didn't happen, shifting responsibility for the behavior, saying she caused it. Another one is using children, making her feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass her, threatening to take the children away, male privilege, treating her like a servant, making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men's and women's roles, using economic abuse, preventing her from getting or keeping a job, making her ask for money, giving her an allowance, making her ask for money, not letting her know or have access to family income. And the last one is coercion and threats, making her carrying out threats to do something to hurt her, threatening to leave her, saying that he'll commit suicide, reporting her to the government, making her drop charges, making her do illegal things.
I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you about that wheel that you demonstrated for us. Is this something that you created?
No, this was created by, up in Duluth, Minnesota, there was a domestic violence advocacy group and also researchers, and they looked through police reports, they interviewed victims of domestic violence who've come through the shelter, and through a period of time, they developed these 8 items and created the power and control wheel. This wheel is used around the country and actually internationally. Like I said, it's the base curriculum for the Batteries and Prevention Program class I talked about, and it's taught quite readily all across America, used by domestic violence shelters, etc.
How long has this wheel, if you will, been in existence?
Yeah, probably, I'm guessing 30 years or so. Could be a little more.
Are there any agencies within the state of Florida that predicate their decisions upon the Duluth Power Wheel?
Yeah, the DCF accepted the power and control wheel for the curriculum for the BIP class.
That's the Florida Department of Children's and Families.
They were the ones who were controlling the BIP class when it started up. Also, a lot of federal money, Domestic Violence Against Women Act, things like that have always promoted the power and control wheel bill, and also given out grants in education.
The majority of abusers, male or female?
Majority are male, but there's certainly a percentage that are female. I'd say it's at least 2/3 male at the least. And in my practice, I have male victims.
And what about on the other end, the victims of domestic violence? What's the percentage of males and female?
So again, there's some different statistics. Somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 are men. And
Are men as victims of domestic violence?
2/3 to 3/4 abusers. So that on the other side of that, they're 1/3 to 25% male victims. And I just got a male victim this past week.
So, look,
I'm done.
I want to make sure we're clear on this.
Sure.
You've told us that the percentage of abusers that are male is approximately 2/3, is that
At least
correct?
2/3. There's some statistics to make it actually higher.
Would you tell us, please, what percentage of domestic violence victims are female?
Somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4.
All right. Now, I want to ask you if you would educate us, Mr. Ferris, about whether or not there are common characteristics that abusers share.
And I certainly can do that, Mr. Teller. Can I make one closing statement about the Duluth wheel? And
Sure.
Power and control. So I think it needs to be said, and maybe I didn't say it, that the whole idea of the use of the wheel is to get compliance, the abuser with their victim. So they're looking to control them, and either they use those criminal, the battery, or they use emotional abuse or intimidation or use different techniques to try to control them. So the victim of domestic violence is placed with wanting to have the least harm to them. So they get into a compliance, I call it equilibrium type of status mode, where they seek to get along, to go along. They don't want to poke the bear. They don't want, they believe that this is certainly a danger to be involved with this person, their mate, their spouse, etc. So they comply in this compliance mode, and they can certainly appear to society as nothing's going on, but there actually is, and they're afraid to display that because of the retribution that might happen.
All right,
I'll go
so
on from there.
this wheel then is the product, if you will, of the science of domestic violence over the past 30 years.
And throughout my entire practice, the thousands of people that I've counseled and even the 500s I've arrested, I see this repetitively to be true.
All right, now would you please tell us,
Oh, I do. Thank you.
I need you to make sure you keep your voice up so that
Yes,
others
sir.
can hear you. Would you now tell us, Mr. Ferris, whether or not there are common characteristics that abusers share?
They can be anyone from all socioeconomic stratas, and that's been my experience also. And I said earlier, predominance men, but also females.
What's the motivation for their behavior, abusers?
They want to control their partners. I find often an ownership type attitude. They want to control them.
They treat generally pets in the household.
Pets. So statistics have shown that abusers abuse pets well above average, more than average citizens would. And so I have two theories about that. One is that they're missing some empathy, or they tend to see things as objects. And so can I explain why they abuse pets? So if a pet belong to the female or their partner, the victim.
Can you approach, please?
Mr. Ferris, would you describe for us what the term coercive control means in a domestic violence relationship?
So coercive control, acts of aggression, assaults and harm, punish, frighten the victims. And that fits in with creating fear, and it fits in with this whole continuum of power and control, the pattern that is developed to control the victim.
Do offenders always behave violently, or does the abusive behavior happen in cycles?
They don't always act violently in the common term of a battery or an assault. It can be accomplished just by threats and fear. And in terms of a cycle, there can be violent or emotionally abusive state, and then a honeymoon side of state, and then it cycles back. In the field, we talk of a model of kind of like rain and sunshine.
Let me ask you, Mr. Ferris, does the victim always appear to be afraid or act like they are afraid of the offender?
Definitely not. Oftentimes, the motivation is to hide the abuse from friends, family, law. There's lots of repercussions if it's disclosed. One could be fear that the oppressor, the abuser, husband, the boyfriend, the wife, whoever is the abuser, will harm them. So they're very scared. The other is they might not even understand that they're victims of domestic violence. Quite often, when I get clients, people don't know those definitions.
How common is it, Mr. Ferris, for a victim of domestic violence to smile and act happy in the company of the abuser?
Very much so, and also in terms of even in public or with family.
Why?
Because they're afraid. They found this least resistance. They're trying to not poke the bear, as we'll say, or we've all heard the term walking on eggshells. They're trying to avoid aggression by their partner because they've grown to believe that there's a threat here.
So would that be, could we characterize that as an appeasement?
Totally appeasement. It's something I see quite often. And if
What
I'm
is the victim trying to accomplish by engaging in the appeasement behavior?
not encourage him to be abusive to herself, or if there's children involved, she's putting up a front to again, create a type of stasis or minimum amount of aggression, so they don't want to, again, to poke the bear. They're afraid of the repercussions.
All right, now give us some insight into this, if you will. Does the introduction of a child change these dynamics at all?
Yes.
Tell us how and why, please.
So it definitely ups the ante, we'll speak.
Objection. I have the same objection as at the bench.
I'll overrule on this one.
So yes, definitely if someone is single and they're being abused, certainly they want to incur least amount of abuse. But when a child's involved, now they're concerned, and if they have a strong maternal instinct, now they're concerned about their own safety and their child's safety. And abusers will use a child as a manipulation tool to try to get at the victim. So the victim, that's even a further degree of a way to pacify. Oftentimes women will stay in marriages because they want to protect the child, even though it's detrimental to themselves.
A couple of questions about abusers, if I may. How do they generally rate on the scale of ability to charm and deceive others?
Quite highly. Those 8 years I taught domestic violence crimes, I got to know quite a few, and some were individual therapy clients also. Many of them, I used to say, have the gift of gab. They were very personable, friendly, not all of them, but a large percent definitely were very much the charmer. They'll hide the abuse, and they use it as a strategy to influence or control their victims.
Is there a pattern, excuse me, is there a pattern, Mr. Ferris, of denying, rationalizing, minimizing, or blaming the victim in these relationships?
And I can say a very high percentage, well, I don't know, over 90% I'd estimate of all my cases involve minimizing, denying, blaming. In fact, on the power and control wheel, I guess it's gone, it's one of the 8 categories is minimizing, denying, and blaming, and it's all a technique. Like she made me hit her. I didn't really do it. It wasn't that bad. They're always trying to minimize and talk their way out of their being abusive.
Would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Ferris, is there a particular time in these relationships when violence is most likely against the victim?
Yes. Very much. The most dangerous time statistically is when a woman or a victim of domestic violence is leaving their abuser, and if the abuser is there. There's a high fatality rate, high incident of danger to them. I've been trained in this in my evaluation with John Hopkins' work. This is a really dangerous time. As advocates for domestic violence, we oftentimes have safety plans. Those plans, part of those plans, you never leave.
All right. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Ferris, if I may, a couple of hypothetical questions
Certainly.
involving the hypothetical abuser and a hypothetical victim. First, I'd like you to tell me, would the following acts be consistent with an abuser? And allow me to finish, and then you give your opinion.
I'm going to object to that.
All right. Do you want to approach?
Yes.
So, Mr. Ferris, I'm going to give you a series of hypotheticals, and I'd like you to tell us if it's consistent with abuse.
Yes, sir.
Shooting a gun in the kitchen of a home in an effort to intimidate the victim to stop speaking. Throwing the loaded gun at the victim. Cruelty to pets. Punching a dog in the face hard enough to knock the dog unconscious. Throwing a cat down the steps. Placing a tracker on the victim's car, an illegal tracker. throwing things, breaking things, yelling, screaming, belittling, cursing, humiliating, declaring such statements as rid the earth, being in a murderous mood, kill all the bad people, take them out, being caught at night, peering into windows of the victim's home, violating a no-contact order by sending a package, driving from South Carolina to Florida to be able to follow the victim, suicidal threats if the victim leaves, more than 30 years age difference, and finally, prior marital history whereby the prior wife explains how she was beat up on the honeymoon. Would that be consistent with abuse?
Absolutely. And not only absolutely, but those are checklist points right off the Duluth Power and Control wheel, and right off my experience, they're stereotypical abuse techniques.
All right, and now my last question for you, Mr. Ferris, is I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Tell me if this would be consistent with someone who suffers from abuse. Sending texts that are conciliatory with friendly emojis, accompanying the abuser during child time sharing ventures, acting deferential and subservient in joint therapy sessions, but decisively different in individual sessions, fearful of the abuser finding out the victim described him as controlling, manipulative, and abusive, and being exposed to threats, intimidation, pushing, holding down, humiliating, cursing. Would that be consistent with a victim of domestic violence?
Without a doubt. These are, again, techniques of compliance, not wanting to poke the bear, walking on eggshells, trying to minimize harm to themselves and their children. They'll put up a front. They don't want anyone to know, and they don't want their abuser to be angry by them disclosing. So, yes.
Lastly, one other factor I neglected to mention, would a video of the abuser and the abused at a restaurant with the child and another adult, whereby they are all acting happy, be consistent as well?
Well, certainly, if you're asking, they're acting happy, is she still a victim of domestic violence? Definitely, and it also fits with this whole idea of appeasement. We have to remember that the domestic violence comes in layers through the years of events. So one incident,
Judge, I'm going to object to non-responsive.
that behavior isn't just a spot image right then. What's inside her? Why is she acting that way? That's what I would ask clients. That's what we're looking for. And if it's truly a victim of domestic violence, she'll be in this appeasement mode to try to please him and not disclose the abuse to get along sort of description.
My final question as it relates in general to domestic violence. Assume, hypothetically, there were several violent or semi-violent acts of domestic violence, and then there was a break in the chain of events for, let's say, as much as a year or two, and then it started up again. Does the victim remember, and is the victim affected by the earlier acts of abuse?
Without a doubt. I've got clients who tell me about...
Sustained.
Yeah, just...
So, yes, definitely, they don't forget the abuse that's occurred to them, trauma lasting. Adults remember childhood trauma, let alone something from several years ago. Like I say, layers of impacts of behavior.
Thank you very much. No further questions from Mr. Ferris.
State, Cross.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, Mr. Ferris.
Good morning.
Mr.
Okay.
I want to ask you give you some examples and ask you if this is consistent with a victim mentality.
Sure.
Minimizing the abuse.
Now you're asking me if the victim would minimize?
Yes. But what I mean by that, and maybe I said it wrong, is covering or taking blame for the abuse, covering for the abuser, taking blame.
Yes.
Okay. Making excuses for him.
Definitely.
Or her, I guess, but not reporting the abuse.
Right.
dropping charges if they were filed,
Yep.
not standing up for themselves,
Yes.
and not leaving.
Yes.
I'm going to put that wheel back up, and I want to talk to you about the pie sections each.
Sure.
Okay, sorry, Judge. While she's fixing it, and I know you're familiar, and do you have a copy in
I
front
do.
of you?
I want right
too.
in front of me.
And so I want to talk first about the use of intimidation. Would you agree that if somebody, this says making her afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying things, her property. We talked about a break. If those things weren't occurring for years, would you, it had allegedly occurred prior to that, would you still consider that part of this dynamic?
Yes.
If it's been at a distance in time?
I think the distance can be totally irrelevant.
And there's a section on here about the economic abuse. Would you find that if a hypothetical victim was living on her own for several years, had no monetary dependence on the alleged abuser, and lived in her own home in another state for part of that, and there was no monetary connection, that would not apply to a relationship?
Could you restate the question?
So if in this wheel,
Right.
hypothetically, when I'm talking just about using economic abuse,
Right.
would you agree, would you say it still applies if the victim was living on her own for several years with family and independently sufficient economically? No financial dependence on the other person. Would you agree with me that economic abuse would not apply to that relationship?
From the scenario you give me, it doesn't sound like it would apply.
And for isolation, would you agree that if it's the same facts, living on her own for several years with family, so I know it says isolated from family, I think, living on her own with family and having some periods of no contact for over a year, and then being back in contact, but living separately and having her own cell phone, having her own car, having her own home, would you agree with me that that's not a situation where there was isolation?
Well, you have to remember, under the isolation also comes jealousy and justifying actions. So in terms of isolating, not letting their partner or the victim go to work or see family, in that sense, what you're saying is true. But a component of isolation could also be extreme jealousy, possession, your mind, those sort of things.
And I didn't add those facts. You're adding those facts, right?
Well, under the power and control world, the last item, I don't know if you actually mentioned it, using jealousy to justify actions.
And if that was not a factor, that's not a factor. for my scenario.
Then isolation component may not be part of that component for the scenario we're looking at, the couple we're looking at.
And why do you say may not? What part of that would apply?
Well, would not be.
Okay, thank you. Using the children. If the hypothetical victim had custody of the child and attempted to terminate parental rights, and the hypothetical abuser had to seek court intervention to get the child,
Right.
would that be a factor in your consideration of whether children were being used? If she had sole control of the child?
So you're asking me if I could just reframe that the alleged abuser is not he's not using child against their alleged victim, then they're not necessarily guilty of using the children.
I'm not asking if it's guilty, I'm just asking if that would apply. We've talked about how these
Right.
things apply.
It may not apply, it would not apply, but I think if I could mention, you're missing the point of the power control wheel. This is about pattern of behavior.
I'm not missing it, I'm just asking hypothetical
Okay.
questions. How about the using a male privilege? If that hypothetical abuser was not having any control over her big decisions or did not live with her, so was not being the master of the castle, was not treating her like a servant because they lived separately, and was not defining their roles, in fact, was offering to purchase things, get her anything she needed, those kind of things. Would you agree with me if those were the facts of a relationship, male privilege would not apply?
No, I wouldn't agree with you.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, the men's roles, and when you say purchasing things, I would want to look into what, is that a concept of what the role is? I'm the man, I purchase things, I control things for you, I decide what to get, et cetera. So that could be a male privilege issue.
Okay, and I understand that, and that was a poor fact scenario in mine. I think it kind of goes with the economic abuse, and what I should have asked is, if she's asking for, can you stop and get me boxes, or can you stop and get me tape, or can you stop and get me something else? And he is, yes, of course, and he does it. That's what I'm talking about, not him telling her what she may have.
So in terms of him buying things for her that she's asking for, I wouldn't consider that to be domestic violence.
Okay, you would not.
No.
Okay. And so that's, other than that caveat, then male privilege wouldn't necessarily apply to the cycle that we're in, under my facts.
The facts are not complete enough for me to come to the conclusion.
How about minimizing, denying, and blaming? What, you said that was present in 90% of the cases.
Quite a bit, yes.
Right. I think you said 90.
I did.
What if the hypothetical abuser says, I was wrong, I lost control, I shouldn't have done those things, and never says it was your fault you did those things? Would you then feel like that's not minimizing, denying, and blaming?
No, I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay.
Because it could be that part of the strategy of minimizing could be that, I'm sorry, I didn't do it. That could just be minimizing.
I'm sorry, no, I didn't do it. I'm sorry I did it.
Right.
That's part of
That's
minimizing?
Yes.
Well, certainly not denying or blaming, right?
Would need more definitive
I guess
facts.
I need an explanation on if somebody takes responsibility for accusations against them, how
Right.
that is minimizing. Just to say, yes, you are correct, and I am sorry.
It could be a way to dialogue or to minimize what occurred by accepting for it, and that could be part of their scenario.
Could it also be the opposite?
Yes,
If that person
it could
is
be.
taking credit, is taking responsibility for their actions.
Right. It doesn't deny that it happened, that's for sure.
Right.
Okay.
And no blame being set forward if they say it's my fault.
Well, just because someone apologizes doesn't mean they weren't abusive.
I'm just talking about the factors on this wheel.
Right.
And whether or not, if somebody, under my hypothetical, admits to responsibility for the accused abuse and apologizes for that, whether or not you would consider that denying and blaming.
I would need more information on the relationship and the scenario to decide that.
Is there a scenario? Okay. How about using emotional abuse? If there's no accusations of any name calling or telling her what to wear, this hypothetical victim, in fact, she's comfortable enough to wear a sports bra and shorts around him. There's no playing weapons. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. No evidence in their relationship of playing mind games or humiliating her or making her feel bad about herself. Would you agree with me that that might not be a factor?
Well, you gave me a discrete list, but emotional abuse also includes name calling, putting someone down, affecting them emotionally.
I guess, is there a scenario, Mr. Ferris, where you will agree with me that a relationship might not include emotional abuse? Because I don't know how to give you enough factors for you to say, no, it may not.
Yeah, I can't help you with that. I'm not asking the questions.
Oh, I was asking you one. If there was
I
a
know,
scenario.
I'm not. You are.
Would you take into account, based on, with these factors such as emotional abuse, economic abuse, male privilege, using children, all of these, if the alleged victim, or let me give you a scenario, she does not live with him. She's actually in another relationship, potentially engaged to a new man. She tells him that she does not want to be with him, and she plans to move away without him. Would those be factors that you would have to take into account when deciding if that relationship fit this power and control?
Well, that would be factors of the relationship, but I haven't heard you say anything about what their history is, what trauma she's experienced, what's going on with children in their lives, all sorts of other dimensions of their relationship.
I guess, so is there no scenario where there can be abuse in a relationship and then there no longer is abuse, where they are no longer in this wheel? Because the way you're answering your questions, that's the impression I'm getting.
So I have come across situations where there's an emotional abuse or a physical abuse, but it's not a pattern or behavior. It doesn't go on over a period of time in an attempt to control someone. So if I may, if someone pushes down their girlfriend on a night out and he gets arrested for domestic violence because they live together, it's a battery, that's domestic violence. But that's it. She's not appeasing, she's not put an emotion, the whole power control dynamic isn't happening. That is domestic violence under criminal law, but it isn't domestic violence in the sense of a pattern or behavior to try to get the appeasement or this sort of consensus of a victim where they're afraid to poke the bear, all the things I've already talked about. So if that answers your question.
It didn't. If your testimony that once a relationship has these power and control aspects, that is forever, even if there's no continued allegations of abuse for years, no continued allegations of abuse, no continued allegations of emotional abuse, never any allegations of sexual abuse. The parties are living apart. They're independently, I keep saying independently wealthy, that's not what I mean, independent, economically independent. The female is telling him she doesn't want to be with him and has moved on to a new relationship. Mm-hmm. Is there no scenario, in your opinion, where people can get off this power and control wheel, even if they were on it at some point in their relationship?
I think it's possible, but it's not likely, and it's not the typical thing that I see. Usually there's still a dynamic of emotional abuse.
So even under my facts,
yes,
with no allegations of emotional abuse in years, it's your opinion that not good enough, they're still on this power control wheel?
Well, all I can speak from my critical learning and studying this, and also my practice, and I have custody issue couples where they're domestic violence, and 10 years later there's still abuse taking place, even though they're remarried and don't live together. So by example, I see continued abuse. Could there be a couple that don't? I'll say it's possible.
Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Redirect.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Can this witness be released?
Yes.
Sir, you are released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Thank you for all your help.